And we are live.
Hey, this is Drew Ackerman, and I get to present and interview Dalia Kinsey, and I'm going to go through Dalia's bio, and then we'll talk about podcasting. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to share them in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can at the end. So I met Dalia through podcasting, and Dalia Kinsey is a school nutrition specialist and health at every size registered dietitian on a mission to make health accessible to all by encouraging body respect and joyful music. Dalia worked in public health for years prior to moving to K-12, where she manages special diets, menu planning, social media, nutrition education for a medium-sized district. She created the School Nutrition Dietitian podcast to serve as a one-stop shop for best practices and inspiration for professionals in school food service. And she uses this platform not only to capture the wisdom of veteran employees that are retiring, but to stress the importance of offering students evidence-based nutrition education untainted by diet culture. But for me, it's maybe you could sum it up in your own words. Like, tell us a little bit about your podcast, and just tell us a little bit about it and what listeners can expect to hear.
So I've shifted a lot of things lately because so much has changed. And anybody who's created content knows what you think you're going to do when you start out with a project. If you stick with it, you're going to end up pivoting at some point, whether it's because you realize your audience needs something different or because you feel more passionate about certain things. You always end up in a different place than where you thought you were going. So at first, I started the podcast to make it an easy to use professional learning tool for people around my age and younger that were coming into the field, because it's a job where a lot of people who work at the administrative level, they're really happy and they never leave. So when you start and you're new because somebody retired or because another millennial already left, the training is just, it's not great because people don't remember how they learned everything that they know, and they don't remember what's crucial to tell a new person that there's literally no way of you knowing. So I thought, I need to talk to other people who have a lot of wisdom that are retiring, and then other younger people who've come in, what resources they've accessed and what they would share with other new people. So that was the original plan. And as things have evolved, especially with the uptick in concentration on social disparities and the Black Lives Matter movement picking up momentum again, I've felt more compelled to focus on the impact that people in this space have on health outcomes, not just because of nutrition, but because of unconscious bias and so many other things that affect how your health plays out that really make, to me, racism as a public health emergency that just hasn't been focused on at all. So I've been doing content around that. And then because of COVID, we've had a lot of regulatory changes. So I've been focusing on trying to keep up with what the USDA is passing down to us on the local level for how we're going to feed our children. It's a very strange time we're living in.
Yeah, so there's so many layers there. It's particularly tied to hidden voices. Like, I'm not even sure where to start, but let's start at the surface and work deeper. So you started this podcast about an industry you work in and school nutrition. And that in some senses like a hidden voice. Like, to me, as someone that that's just one level of my own ignorance, like, just to get started, but whoa, there's all of this going on behind the scenes, and it's an essential industry, but it's also, you're dealing with food scarcity and constant changes in nutrition knowledge, and then also dealing with all these layers of state and local and federal government. And you're giving voice. I mean, because to me, listening to your podcast, it's like, okay, there's entrepreneurs in there, there's people, there's leaders. So tell me a little bit about what drew you to start making the podcast. like which came first? Like, was it your interest or were you listening to other podcasts? Like, how did you get there to be like, I want to start a podcast about this?
I've been listening to podcasts for a long time, not as long as people who started listening before you could just get it straight from iTunes, not that long. But I always loved radio. I was born in 81. So I used to get a lot of my entertainment in that form. And I hung out with my grandma a lot, and she also liked that type of entertainment you listen to where your brain fills in the gaps. And I always thought I wanted to be on the radio, even as a kid. Do you remember when you would shadow an adult and see what their job was in elementary school and middle school? Yeah, I went over to a neighbor's house because I heard that he worked for the public radio station there, and weaseled my way into shadowing some stranger at a radio station. I was like, oh, this is great. But it was so heavy on the technical skills. I wasn't as interested in that. I really just wanted to show up, tell stories, have interesting conversations with people that I wanted to talk to. But there was nowhere to do that until podcasting came along. And the technology has gotten more and more and more user friendly. But I always worried that I didn't have enough content to share. I kept wondering what my subject matter would be. And then when I got in this field, the USDA requires people to train on certain subjects every year. So after the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act that Michelle Obama helped roll out, there's specific CEUs you have to get every year. So literally picking this as my subject area, there's a long list of topics that people must cover. And that's like my cheat sheet for things that people need to know about. And I thought, score, this is what I need to do. This is my area.
And so, how has the response been? Like, are you hearing from other uh, people at different roles in school nutrition that want to start podcasts, or districts being like, "Hey, how did you do this?" And then also, I guess off of that is like, how has the reaction been to like your local coworkers, and then the people you interact with on a professional basis outside of your local area?
I've been learning so much about my potential audience and where they are with their technical skills. I've had lots of people tell me they've heard about it. They still kind of think it's a blog, and they will start listening as soon as they can just click it on YouTube. Like, people have literally said that. So I haven't been able to turn as many people as I thought I would into podcast listeners, but I do hear from people from all over the country that are mostly younger than me, who definitely know what a podcast is, and they're already on Spotify, so it's not difficult for them to access it. But it's been interesting how many people just, it's so elusive to them, it's still so unfamiliar. I thought that this was becoming mainstream, and then when I explained it's just radio on demand, essentially, like, remember the radio? You used to like that. It's not that hard, but it's just funny. Some people think it's more complicated than it really is. To me, the hard part of podcasting is the same thing with any kind of content, creating what your audience wants, putting something out there that's meaningful, not the technical part. The technology part's not difficult. I was asked by the professional association to do a webinar on what podcasting is and how you could use it in your organization. And after that, I did get a lot of inquiries about, like, I wonder how I could use this maybe for training inside the district. So it could just be an unlisted thing that you use for people to get announcements from you and need to know type of information. It's so easy these days.
Yeah, and it seems like as you're talking about it, like it is such a resource for knowledge sharing, right? Like I put myself in the position of these younger workers coming into an industry, and then yeah, the people are retiring and leaving with all that institutional knowledge, or not being able. Not everybody's a teacher, right? And they're not able to share
Right.
it. So you're able to kind of bridge that. How do you end up, like, how much time do you put into like finding guests and deciding on topics? And is it like a lot of outreach, or is it a lot of inbound?
A lot of outreach, and the only inbound is usually someone who has a product or service that they also want to share. And they've been incredible. Like, some of these are younger people that really have nailed content marketing, and they don't make you feel like it's a long commercial where they just plug what they do. They really come in with the value in mind and with a lot of structure. There are a lot of really organized people out there, which I just, I love people like that who come up with the spreadsheet and they're like, this is what I want to cover. Those are my people.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, so what, like, so you got the idea, you're listening to podcasts, you started making podcasts, and now that you've been doing it for a while, when you look back, like thinking about when you first started out, is there any piece of advice you'd give to yourself, like in those early few months of starting your podcast that you already know now that you'd say, hey, like let's look at this or put more energy into this?
I would say stop trying to control everything and trying to record content 6 months in advance. It's not going to work because things are constantly changing. And if you really want all your content to be something that's relevant to the audience right now, a quarter in advance is pushing it. Like that's plenty. And then as a new podcaster, I made the mistake a lot of people make. I recorded several episodes before listening to them. And then there were audio issues that I easily could have fixed had I listened immediately after it was recorded, which is what I should have done. But aside from that, really everything that you need to know just keeps revealing itself as you do the work. And that's been a huge lesson for me in life, period. When you don't feel like you have clarity, the clarity is in the doing. And you can't figure everything out before you start doing the thing. You just have to do it and things become clearer. And it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to change directions. Everyone that I know that's got any staying power with content creation, they always are adapting and making little changes.
So learning is in the doing and not being perfect and keeping going. And so you have this nice podcast that you've been working at for a while, and then in January and February this year, suddenly our attention in how we live our lives totally shifts around coronavirus. And you're at the intersection of so many things, school nutrition and schooling. But this is one of the issues that has a direct impact on you professionally, but also your podcast. Like, and I mean, listening to your podcast is just blown away at how you are able to stay fluid and kind of stay true. Like I think about like the idea of again coming back to this voices thing, of you're able to adjust your voice and even talk to the audience and say, "Geez, well, I was making these episodes way ahead and anticipating what our industry needs would be." And then everything changes. So what was that like? What was that experience like? And how did you work your way through it and learn through it?
Because I like structure so much and I like planning so much, it was stressful. And I started to notice in a lot of ways where I add stress where stress doesn't need to be, because there's so many things you can't control. It doesn't make sense to get bent out of shape over those things. I mean, you acknowledge them, but you really have to learn to work with them. Like if you're really rigid, you're just going to be broken by all the waves of change that come through life in general. So it's been an exercise in learning personal resilience for sure. And then just being transparent. And I feel better when I just own it and say, like, I hate that I'm having to be flexible right now. Somehow it makes it easier to just move forward. Like I'm having this horrible, awkward feeling. I know in the beginning of one of the episodes in January, I had an unplanned surgery. I had a deviated septum corrected, and I hadn't recorded my intros because, like a dummy, I thought that was going to be an easy breezy surgery. And I sound like a monster on the episode, but I just owned the mistake, told the audience what was wrong with my disgusting post-op voice, and kept it moving. I like the transparency when I hear it from other content creators, reminding me that you don't have to be perfect and that you can still stay on mission if you know what that overarching mission is. So it became clear to me that what I really want to do in my professional life and in my life is to reduce the suffering of others. And there's a lot of different ways that can be done. And so even now, with people feeling so distraught over all the changes with coronavirus and people like not able to sleep, worried about the children that we can't reach, that we can't feed, the children that when we don't see them, we don't know what's happening to them, but we know it's not good because we're all mandatory reporters. A lot of times the people you see in the cafeteria, that may be the only adult that has a long period of time with you, where they can really look at you. They might see bruises, they might see something else. They're available for you if you need to go to them for help as well. So everyone's just been really upset about not seeing the kids in person. We feel better when we like know where they are and what they're doing. So just addressing that and thinking about how we could bring that stress down a little bit. What can we actually do? Because there's some things we just can't control. Knowing that my mission was just reduce suffering made me feel better about, oh, am I completely abandoning my outlines and my plans for the year, or am I still on mission?
Whew, I hope if you're watching, this is like unbelievable advice. Like the idea of the mission and finding your mission through making something is something hard lessons for me to learn, not just in podcasting, but in life. But when I listen, like there's always like in podcasting, there's a lot of talk and there's like, oh, this is the way you do it, or this is, oh, it's through, this is what happens. But when I listen to your show, I found like this kind of, I guess I was learning about leadership in a different way. Like a lot of people say, oh, it's passion, or oh, this is what leadership is. And maybe it's because I don't work in school nutrition that I was able to like hear, to get to know you, not, I mean, as a person, but I mean, in a podcast way, but it's like by listening to your curiosity, by listening to like what you care about. And then now by like your mission was already coming through. So it's kind of like this leadership through you just being yourself and your humanity shining through. And then it shines through even more in hard times like now, in times of change, and in times like where old trauma is being resurfacing. Like you were talking on your show about your nerves being rubbed raw, and like, I mean, schools are just such at an intersection of like interpersonal racism and systemic racism.
Yeah.
And food scarcity. So there's so many layers to it. And your reaction was to talk about it, and to be honest about it, and to also offer solutions to people that were listening, to say, hey, maybe it's time to look inward. Maybe it's time to lead with compassion, or, maybe it's time. So do you feel that leadership when you're making the show? Because it's like, like, how hard is it to go back to that mission? Like, how do you balance out the doubt with the mission and your heart and your soul that goes into the show?
Someone gave me some really good advice to really focus on to keep thinking about the person that I want to help, and have like a mental image of somebody who is a good representation of that person. And someone mentioned, it's funny, I was working on a book project. I put a pin in it. I'll pick it up later. But just coronavirus stressed me out so much. I was like, not one more project. But I was working with a writing coach who said for her, when she sits down to write, she envisions that person that she wants to help. And then all of her fears about, am I doing it right? It just kind of dissolves. And I picture my mother as a younger person, maybe currently around my age, and just all the cumulative stress of being an immigrant, being a person of color, being in the South, and just all the additional stress that you have in life in general as a young woman in a, kind of male-dominated society, we all know. And I think about what advice would I want to share with her? How would I try to support her? So I picture that person that I have so much compassion and love for. And it's just like when you're talking to a friend who's going through a rough time, you may think for a second about, how do I want to phrase this? But you just jump in there because you care about that person, and you just jump in and start trying things to relieve their stress or give them support or help them out. So that has been the most helpful thing for me. Not thinking about me, but just thinking about that person, my ideal, listener, avatar, whatever, and trying to share with that one person in mind, so that it's conversational. And then your personality naturally comes out. And I've gotten more clarity on who I am, or how I'm perceived in general as a person, through this process. Because most of us, even if you are kind of an introspective person, you don't think about yourself nearly as much as you will when people start coming back to you with feedback on how certain things you've said or done have revealed who you really are.
Wow. Yeah. So I guess like flipping it on the other side for you, because maybe anybody that's watching this might not see all of the benefits. I mean, there's benefits from having a mission and enacting the mission. Like, what other things are you personally like? What kind of growth are you experiencing out of making your show and then facing? I mean, one thing I always think about is like if I didn't make my show or you didn't make your show, it offers all of these obstacles which aren't necessarily pleasant at the time that we have to confront that we could have got out of, right? Like, so how has that impacted you personally in your personal relationships and your professional relationships?
It's been so helpful with just believing that my voice matters and that someone wants to hear it. And sometimes I think it can be related to how you've been treated through the years. You may think that people don't want to hear you. But then again, I think that's something that almost everybody struggles with, thinking, do I have something meaningful to say? Does anyone want to listen to it? Understanding that it takes all kinds, no matter what your personality type, what your educational background, there's someone out there who wants to hear from you. And there's something about the way you will phrase it that will hit them in such a special way that they'll continue to seek you out. And it also has taught me resilience as far as I've had such a fear of criticism, as I think we probably all do. I realized my biggest concern when I wanted to create something and I slowed myself down, or it took me forever to do it, was I was afraid of looking like an idiot or looking like an undereducated person. I have major trauma from not getting into gifted as a child. My sister got in the first time she tested. They tested me every couple of years. So they'd say, oh, well, this test score makes it look as though you're above average. You're so great. Sit down, take the test, right? Oh, you didn't make it again. So they told you, you seem exceptional. Oh, just kidding. We were wrong. You couldn't pass the test. So that happened again and again until I think in like sixth grade, I was like, nope, I'm not taking it this year. And I refused. I told my mother, like, I don't care anything about gifted, stupid. But that was a trauma. And I've had this negative relationship with academic pursuits because everybody learns at a different pace. But when you're in a public school setting, or probably any school setting, you have to learn at a preset pace, right? And to this day, when I play games with my sister, she gets on my nerves. She wins all the games. She speaks 6 languages. I only speak 2, and it took me forever to master that second one. We just have gifts in different areas. It took a long time for me to accept that my gifts are valuable too, and I don't just need to sit back and wait for the smart kid to say it.
Wow. That's so amazing that through podcasting, you're able to find your gifts in these traumatic memories, kind of like this, like, oh, I thought this was a liability and really it's turning into this asset. And then it's this asset you can give voice to. In your show, I don't want to use the word responsibility. You have the opportunity to give voice to so many things. I just think about the food scarcity and our conversations and the conversations you have in the show about like, well, what is happening, or even that idea that the food service workers at the schools might have the closest contact to the students, especially for students. I had a lot of issues in school and issues with authority, and yeah, it was like those non-education workers that I felt closer to. Have you heard any like do you hear stories like that from students or workers that you're giving voice to that also might be just disrespected? They'd be like, oh, well, that's just your job here, and it's not as important. And now we're seeing that it might be the food scarcity, and nutrition is, you can't have anything without that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when you spoke about hidden voices and not really realizing what was going on with school nutrition, almost everybody I know who's new to the field of school nutrition, we all forgot that there were adults with jobs and careers at school. They're just invisible to you. Children are very self-centered. People are very self-centered, and people, like, as they raise you, they kind of try and work that out of you. But I forgot that there was anybody working in the cafeteria. I forgot that the teachers were real people with jobs. So everybody forgets about all the different jobs that exist inside the public school system, but we've been pushed to the forefront because we were considered essential workers during the first wave of COVID. And I think it's really helped a lot of people who work on the front lines, who are in those entry level positions, to feel more of a sense of pride around what they do. Because a lot of them come to work, honestly, because they need the health insurance. Some people, when they're finished working at the end of the month, they net like $20. They literally have the job for the insurance, and because a lot of them love children, and they would go for free. I mean, some of them are parent volunteers that started working for us. So it's been good for them to feel acknowledged. And a lot of people do kind of condescend to them because it isn't a position that requires college. And if you're in the kitchen, some people do have more of an expansive educational background or lots of work experience in other food service settings, but a lot of people don't. A lot of them are moms that need a schedule that works with the kids that they have that are still in school. But they do make a tremendous difference. And I've heard from a lot of adults who came to people like the food service workers or the custodial staff to have that parent type of relationship with someone who wasn't in a position to tell them what to do, who was only in a position to care for them and communicate with them and to give them a voice. So I think there are a lot of feel-good stories that are coming out of this, but I'm sure once this is all over with, again, because people love hierarchy, they'll continue to condescend to people who are in those service type positions. But I think that this is going to be helpful to keep people feeling energized to keep doing the work that they do.
And your show is giving them other tools too, like a lot of the stuff you talk about, or your recent guests talking about mindfulness and self-care and body awareness, or trying to have good habits with exercise, really is putting more tools in people's toolbox. One of the things, like, I think about when I make stuff, and especially watching people start flourishing, making their podcasts, is like, sometimes you make the thing before you make the thing, or you have to make a few things first. If there was no limits, and if no one was listening to this or watching this live stream, what do you think you'd want to be doing? Like, if you were doing your show in addition to your show or beyond the show, would it be a book project, or is it something else like you really feel like drawn to make or create next or speak about?
I'm really excited about the idea of online conferences and summits. So I'm working on a project now. The landing page is live. It's Black Joy Summit, and it's focused on trying to live your best life in the face of adversity, because the changes that need to happen, I don't believe they're going to happen in my lifetime. I think we're close to something major, and maybe there'll be police reform. I think something useful is about to happen, but you can't really legislate racism out of people. So there's been an uptick and a pushback and just blatant displays of racially charged aggression. Like 20 minutes from me where I go to get on the interstate to get to work, someone has put up like this massive Confederate flag sales booth, and they're getting a lot of business. And I know when I was a kid, people had t-shirts that said heritage, not hate. And, we bought that for a while, but presently, if you all of a sudden set a booth up, it's not because you've just suddenly felt compelled to celebrate your heritage. That's just hostility. And yeah, so a lot of people live around stuff like that, and they're really struggling emotionally. And I really want to focus on, like you said, putting more tools in the toolkit so that people can cope with what they're going through right now, but then also thrive and do whatever meaningful things they're really here to do, and not let the distress that comes from systemic oppression stop them from living.
So this conference would add, lead with joy, is confronting the trauma and the aggression and the microaggressions, like all lives matter, that kind of stuff, like
Right.
with joy. And yeah, I think about Ruth King. Have you ever read about I mean, for me, as a part of someone that's benefited probably from oppression and been a part of the system and has to make a lot of changes if things are going to change and get better, it's like thinking about, yeah, how do you use compassion and I don't know what. So like tell me more about the conference, because it's like
my goal is to network with lots of different people and bring in lots of different speakers, just like they've done here today, so that I can hear different people's perspective on how you turn rage into something productive. What do you do with all these negative emotions that you have built up in yourself? And how do you stop it from eroding your health? How do you stop fear of aggression from putting yourself out there? Because there's a lot of times where I won't do something because I'm afraid that I won't be welcome, or I'm afraid that, I'll have to deal with some kind of microaggressions. And if I push myself and do it anyway, a lot of times I find out that it wasn't the case. But from all these other negative experiences, I'm reluctant to do it because I don't feel like I have the strength to respond in a way that feels empowering or won't get me fired, that sort of thing. So I want to see what other people have to say about what are the tools you should have in your toolkit. How do we take care of mental health in the Black community, where so often that is such a negative. Nobody wants to get therapy. No one wants any medication. There's a lot of stigma related to that, and a lot of stigma to being like what's the right word? Just being different. Like if you have any kind of neurological distinctness about you, if you have ADHD, if you're in any way different, people don't make a lot of room for that. And and then too, with the homophobia and the transphobia, that I think is kind of an extension of this desire to conform and be part of the majority to avoid attack or bullying. It makes it difficult for Black people to be an individual. If you are a trans Black individual, you get pushback from the Black community that says, well, you can't be different in that way. We're trying to be respectable here. So I want to have all kinds of different speakers and presenters that can speak to that, how important it is to be yourself no matter the cost. Because in the end, you suffer such a psychological toll when you continually suppress who you really are because of fear that it won't be seen as acceptable. And then there's so many beautiful things that come out of just being yourself. And there will be rejection. But if you can learn to tolerate that rejection, the rewards are massive. So that's what I'm trying to do.
So you're trying to give people a way to take their voice, hidden voice, and have the tools to be empowered to speak it or live their voice in some sense. Well, exactly. I just looked at the time. If we have time for a couple questions, if anybody has any questions.
Thank you. Somebody said neuroatypical. Thank you.
If anybody has any questions, you could pop it up in the chat. I'll have a softball question to fill the time. So your podcast has a theme song, which I love, which is absolutely amazing. Like, was that inspired by your love of did you hear like, oh, when I make a podcast, I want to have a theme song? Did you hear a podcast, or was it just something? I don't know. It's just so fun.
I knew I wanted a theme song. And I will say, before, when I played around a little bit with content creation and blogging, I had a theme song that had a ukulele in the background, and it was very cute. But because of how low the representation is of Black people in leadership and school nutrition, and because multiple people have told me over the phone and listening to me that they couldn't tell I was Black, whatever that means, I said, you know what? I'm going to give a big old signal that, like, this is a Black lady. I said, this is how I'm going to do that at the beginning of the podcast. I'm going to have a rap song about being a dietitian and eating well. And I found someone on Fiverr, and this guy, he's amazing. I've worked with him since then. I don't know. I don't understand how people do this. I gave him just a few ideas about my vision for the show. I didn't even have any episodes recorded, and just who I was and what I kind of believed in nutrition wise. And 3 days later, he came back with that. Perfect. First try. Perfect. And I'm in love with it. Somebody told me that they played it a couple of times on a loop because it feels like something they could dance to, which makes me really happy.
Yeah, I think like I love it. It captures it. And it's interesting. It's like it captures the spirit of your show. But I also think about like when you do a conference or when you start to present to your own audience, like make sure to play it because you'll find that people in the audience are singing along. Like I found that through my podcast. You could be like, oh, those are the super fans. Like they're mouthing along to the theme song.
Oh, that is so awesome. Oh, I think that would bring me so much joy. I think there's so much to having a tribe and feeling connected, especially if you were a strange child in any way. I know like my husband, he was one of those popular kids, even though he suffered with some feelings of like self doubt or insecurity. But somehow he's just one of those popular guys. And he doesn't have as big of a need for a tribe as I do because it's like my adulthood is just recovering from childhood, which I think it is for so many creators and so many artists. Like you're just rebounding from childhood the rest of your time here on the planet.
All right, we have a couple questions. So David from New York asks, a lot of your conversation here and podcast topics are about honesty and building community. With your podcast, how have you built a community with your listeners?
Really trying to pull them into the conversation. And because I've done this too, I have a lot of shows that I love that ask for feedback on all the time, and I've literally never done it. So I've had to realize that it takes so many times of you asking for people to interact before they believe it or do it. So I try to be present where they are on social media. So I've gotten a lot of messages on LinkedIn, and I love LinkedIn. I found like the woman from the Netherlands who came on to talk about mindfulness. She's so nice. Found her on LinkedIn. I don't see where else I would have ever had a chance to run into her. And her content was great. So I have deliberately reached out and included people in conversation where they like to be on social media.
Awesome. Raven asks, do you feel that you have to edit yourself because it's also your job, and how does that affect your show? Like, wow, that's a great question.
Absolutely, I do. And I've been trying to just really look at what is my real message, because in real life, I curse like a sailor, and I've decided that's not a fit for my job, and people want you to be an example for the children, and I'm not troubled by children using profanity over a certain age. But I realized it was not a fit for the brand. So I'm like, do I really need profanity to share my message? Absolutely not. So I cut all that out. I let my guests who don't work in the same space know, like, this is a PG space. And when it comes to editing things that I think are part of my identity that could be considered controversial, it took me a while to decide what I was going to do with that. And I've decided, you can take it or leave it. I want people to know that I am all about supporting LGBTQIA community members, and that if they're transphobic or homophobic to the extent that they will be, if they're going to have a meltdown because I have somebody trans on the show, then they can go kick rocks. They don't need to be part of the community. They're not a fit. Or they can just be an adult and come in for the episodes that have nothing to do with that. But I decided I didn't want to hide that part of my identity. And I could see some people saying like, oh, it's not a professional fit. But to me, that's not political. This is who some people are. How can your identity be political? I want my community to be inclusive, and people who don't believe in inclusion aren't welcome. So I had to figure that out.
Yeah, because human rights and politics just they're two different things. Like, so I think we're close to time. So what is one closing, like if someone out there is either struggling with like speaking their voice or just getting started, like what's one closing thing you just want people to know about? And then also on the tag of that, like let people know where they can find you and your podcast, School Nutrition Dietitian, which is really hard I'm dyslexic to spell. But it comes up if you, I think if you put school NU, search it in your podcast app and subscribe.
And for the website, I changed it to School Nutrition RD because I realized afterward that no one can spell dietitian, because like in the UK, it really is spelled with a C. We're the only ones who don't do that. So anyway, it's not just you. I would say anyone who's thinking about using their voice and feeling reticent, know that you don't have to be perfect, and that no matter what you do, you can't escape criticism. So know that going in, and don't worry about making a mistake and there being backlash, or don't worry about being yourself and there being backlash. Because I promise you, no matter what you do, somebody won't like it. So you have to go in knowing that, and you just have to do what pleases you and figure out who you want to help and just stay focused on that. And I've started in responding to some criticisms online, even though in real life I'm just like so annoyed with some of the comments. I always reply with, thank you so much for your thoughtful questions, or thank you so much for, adding your perspective to the conversation. And I let them know, like, this is who I am. We're inclusive. And if you don't like that, I understand. I don't say if you don't like that, because if you get too personal, people really, really respond hard. Say, I understand that's not for everybody, and that's also okay. So just letting people know, just like on television, if you don't like a program, what do? You change the channel. You don't have to send a nasty gram. You really don't.
Right.
But people love you.
You could give your opinion by just going away. Like, you don't
yes,
need to.
Exactly. That is a way that you communicate. Like, I don't want more of this content. Well, then just don't engage with it. So,
Right.
but I can be found on Instagram and on Facebook. It's at School Nutrition RD.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being a part of this. I really appreciate it.
Me too. Thank you so much for including me.
Thanks everybody for coming out and watching it on replay. And
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys. Fantastic talk. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks.